Let's talk about plyometrics. Plyometrics is one of those things that people think that they're doing in the training, but it's not strictly true. I like to differentiate between what is plyometrics and what is lower limb conditioning because plyometrics for me are things like hopping and bounding, things that have really fast ground contact times under a quarter of a second. Whereas lower limb conditioning for me is stuff like a drop jump or a box jump, things where you aren't actually reacting to the floor. So you are still jumping, that's true, but it's not a plyometric movement. There's so much confusion I see online between the two, and both are really useful. They're just not the same thing. So what I like to do when I'm programming is split things into horizontal plyometrics and then lower limb conditioning and vertical plyometrics. And these are different groups of exercises that I use in my programming but for different reasons. So, for example, I'll do a quick breakdown. When we talk about horizontal plyos, we've got forms of bounding, we've got hopping, skipping, combinations of hops and steps. And then when we talk about lower limb conditioning, we have things like squat jumps, jump rope skipping, kettlebell jump shrugs, wall balls. We've got things like drop jumps, and we've got things like box jumps. So I like to differentiate between the two. There are some exercises that I like to see as crossover exercises. So standing long jump, that's not necessarily a plyometric movement, but it's a really good exercise to do before you do a plyometric session. Same with pogo jumps. I really like pogo jumps. They're really light ground contact, so they are a plyometric movement, but I tend to put them in a lower limb conditioning session. So yeah, that's how I kind of categorize the movements we do that are lower limb conditioning and plyometric, and neither is wrong, neither is right. I'm just saying that these are very different exercises that bring on different results and different stimulus. So if you've got any questions about plyometrics, hit me up. I also have 2 plyometric programs available on the website elitetrackcoaching.com. Plyometrics chat part 2. So in the last video, I talked about the differences between what I call horizontal plyometrics, lower limb conditioning, and vertical plyometrics. Now I'm going to talk you through how I kind of plan those sessions. So let's start with the horizontal plyometric session. And this isn't just for track and field athletics, this is for any sport. So what we tend to do at the start of the session is some kind of activation exercise like a standing long jump or a box jump, which again, that's lower limb conditioning, but they are good ways to just get the body firing and to get the body moving. And then from there, we move into the actual plyometric content. What we tend to do is we work through bounding, which has 3 variations. We either bound for distance, for rhythm, or for speed. We have Swedish bounds. These are really small, fast contacts on the ground. Again, a plyometric contact needs to be under a quarter of a second. Double taps, that's a similar one. Then we have hopping, which we do for speed or we do for rhythm. Then we've got skipping. Again, you'll see the patterns here. We do that for distance, for height, or we do power skips. And then I like to throw in combinations. Combinations are really good for just patterning up the body and the brain. So we do stuff like hop, hop, step, step, hop, step togethers, big step, little steps, and repeat takeoffs. So that is kind of the fundamentals of my horizontal plyometric training. And as we get towards the season, we kind of take that onto the runway and we make it a little bit more dynamic, stuff like 4 bounds and a jump, 4 jumps into the pit, 4 hops and a jump. And we just start to really increase the intensity and start to measure things. Plyometrics chat part 3. So we already know that we've got horizontal plyos, we've got lower limb conditioning, and we've got vertical plyometrics. Today, I'm going to talk you through my lower limb conditioning exercises. So some of these movements, you can categorize them also as horizontal plyos or vertical plyos, but this is a session that I would tend to do in the gym rather than on the track. So it involves things like wide out, hop and stops and exchanges. These are exercises where you are loading up the lower limbs and they are having to work. We do stuff like squat jumps, sometimes barbell squat jumps, skipping rope, jump rope, really good for just building in those contacts. Again, not necessarily plyometric these because the contacts aren't always less than a quarter of a second, but they are very good for conditioning that posterior chain. Kettlebell jump shrug, wall ball throws, so general throwing, that's always good for lower limb conditioning. Then this is where there's a lot of confusion. It's to do with the boxes. So people think a box jump is plyometrics. It's not necessarily because there's no contact involved, but we are looking at moving quickly through extension. So we do different types of box jumps for height. We also do single leg box jumps, so box hops. Then there's drop jumps. Drop jumps are useful, but you've got to be so careful with drop jumps. So we do a drop jump and stick the landing. There's also a drop jump where you react and jump for height, or where you react and jump for distance. And then sometimes we throw in jump circuits, which is just repeat jumps over and over again, and that is definitely conditioning work. So we've got one more part of my plyometric chat to come, and I'll post that a little bit later. Plyometric chat part 4. So we have previously talked about the differences in plyometric and lower limb conditioning movements, and we've talked about which movements and how we program them in. And this time I want to talk about who should be doing plyometrics, because the answer is everybody. Everybody should be using plyometrics and lower limb conditioning in their training to build strength, make sure the posterior chain is activated. However, if you do plyometrics right, the benefits are massive. If you do them wrong, you are putting yourself at an increased level of risk of injury, basically. And I see it all the time. I see athletes at tracks up and down the country who are very young, and their coaches think they're doing the right thing by adding in what they call plyometrics. And it tends to always involve boxes and jumping on and off things. And you think, do they need to be doing that? And if they're doing it, does the box need to be so high? Do they need to be pounding the joint so much? It's always better to do it right. And that's the same with everything. Start small. Start with just little contacts on the floor. Make sure the toes are up. Making sure you're keeping the knees stiff. Get those little contacts right and then gradually increase it. I see young athletes, like mid-teen years athletes, doing plyometric sessions that my international athletes in their 20s wouldn't be able to handle. So you've got to get the load in right. And if you're unsure on that, drop me a message. Happy to talk about it. Or go on to elitetrackcoaching.com and check out the plyometric programs on there.